Can you walk me through just a day in the life of a recruiter at a company or a tech company? Like, what did you do? What does your average day look like for those that are curious?
It can vary based off of what stage the company is at, like
Mhm.
how much time you're spending evaluating inbound. There's a lot of outbound regardless. So whether it's in between meetings or a blocked off time, just looking at profiles and sending outreach messages, I've always wanted to hit at least 20 messages a day, sometimes up to a few hundred a day. So that requires a lot of focus on using your time wisely. But outside of that, doing calls with candidates, scheduling, meeting with hiring managers, meeting with the other recruiters on your team, it can fly by because there's a lot to do.
Yeah, I loved how you said that on a given day, you can reach out to 10, 20, or hundreds. And without adequate time management, then that is something that could easily lead to what you referred before to burnout. I've been there, you've been there, a lot of recruiters I know have been there, unfortunately. It's horrible that we've been through it, but I think it's also real that it happens in recruiting, like with any other job out there. What people need to know is that I think if you're in an internal capacity, and sometimes you're alone at smaller companies, like their recruiting team is just like one recruiter, maybe two if you're lucky. And if they have 10 positions open or 200, then it's the expectation that really just falls on that one recruiter. There's only so many positions you can actually do at a given time. So is that what happened to you? And is that what kind of led to your burnout? Of course, you don't have to go too deep into it, but I think it's also very insightful that this happens, like with any profession out there. And I think one way to kind of mitigate that from what I see before I hand it over to you is that it's helpful if like the hiring managers, internal stakeholders, even the founders can really put recruiting and see recruiting as like an equal department to all the other departments out there, whether it's engineering, software, marketing, product. A lot of times recruiting is kind of like the afterthought. It's like, oh, we've grown. We don't care about people, initiatives. We don't care about, culture. And we just raised a bunch of money and now we need to help people, and then just kind of hire a recruiter as an afterthought instead of like making recruiting part of like the overall structure and strategy and giving the whole department and profession the respect that it needs and the critical role that it plays in the company. So I know that's long-winded, but I guess going back, my question to you is like, what really caused kind of your burnout, if you don't mind me sharing? And from a lot of the different companies that you worked at, like, did you have instances where you had maybe better relationships with founders or worse relationship with founders, or maybe did their view of recruiting change?
I think I got very critical about, more critical in the interview process about, okay, what is your expectation for me as a recruiter in this role? What's the hiring plan for the year? What's the budget for acquiring inbound in some way? What kind of tools am I going to be able to use to maximize my time? I was very surprised once, like the second time around in interviewing internally, that I just felt a lot of answers were insufficient, and it really bolstered my decision to continue to look for a right fit and also work on a way to freelance so that I could be a degree removed a lot of times, because when you're in an external recruiting role, you can get the bare minimum details that you need to relay to the candidate. But as far as like all of the hiring metrics that may not be realistic, that's not going to impact you in the long term. If you're a contingency recruiter, you get paid for what you kill. I think after the first experience, that was a lot more appealing to me. And I also ended up finding some like contract roles, and now my current internal position where I know exactly what the goals are. All of the budget and planning is predetermined. And there's always going to be some things that are not predictable, but there are some knowns that you can get before you accept a position.
In the tech industry, people use apps like Stack or GitHub or Indeed. Like there's so many platforms out there. So like, what were some of your favorite platforms, and what are some of your favorite tools, whether it's like automation or plugins or anything like that?
Yeah, well, I guess my favorite ones currently are Gem,
Ooh, that's a good one.
any kind of email finder.
Mhm.
I use Kendo, Contact Out. I like the larger databases that give you export access, like Hire
Mhm.
Easy, Zoom Info is pretty decent. I like Crunchbase. I think their data could be cleaner, but I feel like it's a good price for what you get. And I use that a lot for looking at companies in different industries and funding. I love Text Expander. I love Calendly, like a lot of common tools, but in the recruiting space, I think I've also tried out like Hired, Underdog, AngelList Source, like some of these platforms that tell you what people are currently on the market and will clearly list how much they're looking for in terms of comp, which I think can simplify things in certain ways. But these tools can cost a lot. So I'm happy with whatever I get at any given time. And there are only a few things that I can't live without, like any kind of email sequencer, tool for looking up emails, text expander. I also created my own database to sort of help me save money on getting data in the long term and having it so I don't have to pay for it over and over again.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I am familiar with a lot of the ones that you mentioned. You mentioned Text Expander twice. I have actually never heard of Text Expander. What does that do?
Oh, it's like if you have a message, like let's say you're doing outreach on LinkedIn and you don't want to have to actually type out the same message to every candidate, you
Mm.
can put the message into Text Expander and then create like a short code that once you put in that code, the whole message populates. So
Oh, so it's more of an efficient way of copy and paste then.
yes.
Very cool. Awesome, awesome. And then yeah, let's go back and then to your database. I know that you touched upon this a little bit before. So you went from agency to in-house, and then you're still in-house, but along the lines, you've created your own database and you kind of really connected or aligned with just the contingency model where it gives you an opportunity to make more income on the side and just, I guess, give your career more of control in terms of how you want to navigate it. So when did you decide to kind of start that? And then how did you start it? And if you can just share more information about like how it works, that'd be really cool.
Yeah, I wanted to start it after I left my internal position
Mhm.
because, every time you leave an internal role, the contacts that you've put into the applicant tracking system there, you can't take with you.
Mhm.
So I wanted a database that I could basically inject to any startup's applicant tracking system. I could take it with me, like a book of business, basically.
Mhm.
I also wanted to have, that contact information that I was always pulling out, and I wanted to sort of outsource a lot of that manual labor. So putting it into a database that I could access through a web app made it so that I could hire other people to help me build it and get that info and store it in a centralized place. That's
That's
basically what it does.
That's really, really cool. I mean, you do all this work at all of your jobs, and it'll be great to obviously maintain the relationships and the hard effort that you put into cultivating these relationships and carrying you forward. I mean, if anything, it could just be like an extra value add if you interview at new companies. Right? Like, hey, this is the skill set that I bring, but I can also bring a lot more than your other average recruiter. So I think that's really, really cool. I guess moving forward, where do you see like recruiting going? I mean, just what are you seeing in the market right now? It's been a pretty crazy year the past 2 to 3 years. Recruiting before 2020 has always been in demand, and then 2020 happened, which kind of turned everything upside down. And then all of a sudden, recruiters, the first time in my career, almost became the rock stars. Like in tech, if you're a recruiter, like the engineers are rock stars because they're the highest paid, they're the hardest to get to, like everyone needs them. But there was a very unique time period where everyone needed recruiters. And it was like an amazing, demand is still there, but not like at the crazy peak as I saw. And I'm sure you can kind of see it too. But like we were all almost as cool, if not cooler, than engineers in our industry, which is so funny because recruiting has been around for ages. And I think for the first time, everyone looked at recruitment. Wow, recruiting is like trending. Recruiting is trendy. Recruiting is sexy. And all these, all of recruiting professionals that I know, and even you, your colleagues or friends, like they're just getting ridiculous offers left, right, and center. Like the amount of companies reaching out to them or trying to poach them just increased skyfold. Like, what did you see from your experience? I mean, I just thought it was jaw dropping.
A lot more straightforward, like because everyone was open to chatting and everyone was reaching out. So it was really refreshing to me that people just got to the point. I think the remote aspect was great too. It sped things along. That was wonderful. I saw a lot of people on LinkedIn, other recruiters, like very excited about taking on new positions. It seemed like there was always a recruiter I know who was like, oh, I'm doing this other thing now. And then now we're seeing the flip side because layoffs are happening once again. But I do feel like even if you're getting laid off, like there was so much VC money that was coming in over the last 2 years that there are way more startups now. So there are way more positions and opportunities. And I think where recruiting is going is a little bit confusing because before everybody was in office. So if you're accepting a position, you're kind of like thinking mostly about what your package is, the team, what the company does. Where now you're also factoring in, is this going to be the work situation that I want? So as far as, I think there's going to be more flexibility, but maybe a little bit harder time finding something that checks literally all the boxes of the things that you would want to do for internal recruiters. And I also think that because there are so many people getting computer science degrees these days, that tech recruiters that focus on engineering are going to have a diminishing value over the next 10 years. And there's going to be greater value on things like recruiting for product or just other departments.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think to recap, as I mentioned, we became the rock stars, and then we became the flip side, the first people to get fired, unfortunately, which is what is happening a lot. And it just breaks my heart that layoffs are happening. But because everything's remote, it just changes everything. So like, I think the good news is that the past like 2 or 3 years brought recruiting a lot more to the forefront in just terms of discussion and how people perceive recruiting, the importance of it within an organization, within a fast growth company. And then it also just added it, just gave it a lot more awareness. So people who want to be recruiters, I think more and more people want to be recruiters. And I think that's a great thing for just the profession in general. I think, like you said, companies are not going to go anywhere. Companies will continue to get funding and continue to grow. How long this recession happens, who knows? But I think it's still a good time to be a recruiter, to start a career if you're thinking about it and you're listening. And yeah, it's also like really interesting to hear kind of your thoughts on just engineers, recruiters out there that just focus on just engineering. There has been a ton of boot camps that popped up, that are continuing to pop up, and yeah, there's just been a flood into the market of boot camp grads coming in, and it'll be interesting to see like how that changes that overall dynamic and the activity in recruiting moving forward. So I think that's very insightful, and I will personally actually keep a tab on that. Yeah, I mean, I just see that to be super valuable to hear from someone that has experience working on both sides. And I think you've done an incredible job, Jessica, in terms of just navigating your career, working at the companies you did, and now even just taking that extra leap and starting something in your database, which sounds promising. It definitely makes sense. And whether or not you want to stay as a recruiter internally, or maybe you branch up on your own, I think you're definitely positioning yourself off well. So I guess one thing I do want to ask you is, I guess for anyone who is a recruiter right now, who wants to be a recruiter, who wants to, again, just do what you did, do you have, if there's one advice that you can share with people recruiting or just navigating a successful recruiting career, like what would it be?
Well, so my first contingency clients I got through just through people that I had chatted up like years prior, like existing connections. So I would say you just never know who's going to be where in the future. So wherever you're working, whatever you're doing, like be friendly and let people know what you're doing so that they can think of you and reach out to you. And even if, you're not available to do what they want, just having them remember you and reach out is really valuable, especially if you want to take advantage of the opportunity that they have.